Welcome to today's Explainer. We are jumping right into a deep dive on the real mechanics behind successful organizational change. We're going to be looking at some seriously compelling evidence from a fascinating study conducted in West Africa, specifically looking at the telecommunications and refinery sectors over in Côte d'Ivoire. Now, if you've ever survived a messy corporate restructure, you know firsthand just how chaotic they can get. So our goal today? We're going to unpack the hard data on exactly why some companies totally thrive during these transitions, while others just completely fall apart.
It really is the multi-million-dollar question, isn't it? Why do so many organizational change initiatives fail? I mean, we constantly hear buzzwords about agility and adaptability in business. And yet, according to the research we are unpacking today, a staggering 70% of most change initiatives fail. 70%! And the primary culprit? It actually isn't a lack of funding or bad technology. It's employee resistance. When management ignores the human element, you see negative attitudes develop, morale drops off a cliff, and turnover spikes.
So here's our roadmap for this investigation. We're going to cover the challenge itself, the researchers and the environment, and their methodology. Then we'll hit the core structural hypotheses, dive into some really fascinating results on humble leadership, and wrap up with conclusions and future research. All right, part one, the challenge of navigating organizational change. In today's hyper-dynamic landscape, business adaptability isn't just nice to have, it is an absolute requirement for survival. Yet, as we just noted, 70% of change initiatives fail, specifically because management ignores employee resistance. Relying purely on a strict top-down mandate is pretty much a recipe for disaster. Take Nokia, for example. They were an absolute giant in the ICT sector, right? But they famously stumbled into bankruptcy simply because they failed to adjust their internal ambitions and their people to the smartphone revolution. Ignoring the human element has incredibly high stakes. Moving right along to part two, the researchers and the environment. This rigorous research was spearheaded by academics Ba, Sun, Hongzhi, and Educo. What's actually brilliant here is their dual institution background. They're hailing from the Wuhan University of Technology and the Dongbei University of Finance and Economics in China. So they essentially brought this highly analytical, structural approach to a very real-world problem happening thousands of miles away in West Africa. And that brings us to the actual scene of the investigation, Abidjan, which is the economic capital of Côte d'Ivoire. The researchers chose two incredibly distinct high-revenue sectors that are both undergoing massive global shifts. First, you have a telecommunications company with a huge workforce of 3,011 people, and they are grappling with worldwide digital and AI trends. Second, there's a refinery with 776 employees, dealing with all the complex pressures of the global energy transition and brand new market competitors. So these are not theoretical environments at all. These are massive organizations operating right in the thick of survival-level change. Let's look at part three, the study methodology. So, how did they actually build their proof? The team laid out a very clear four-step methodology. Step one, they grabbed a purposive sample of 412 real employees across those two sectors in Abidjan. Step two, they collected the data using SurveyMonkey. For step three, they codified those responses using a standard 5-point Likert scale. And finally, step four, to ensure total academic rigor, they ran structural equation modeling right through Smart PLS4 software. They weren't just casually asking people about their feelings here. They were mathematically modeling human behavior against actual corporate outcomes. Which brings us to part four, the core structural hypotheses. Now, what is really interesting about this research model is how it physically maps out those structural hypotheses, H1 through H6. If you look on the left, we have the input variables of employee involvement. In the middle sits the mediator, and over on the right is the ultimate goal, organizational change. The researchers essentially hypothesized that those inputs on the left don't just magically create change on the right all by themselves. They have to flow through a very specific type of leadership. Let's quickly demystify these core variables. Employee participation basically means giving people a real voice in the decisions that affect them. Empowerment is about delegating authority and boosting an employee's feeling of self-efficacy. Giving them the skills and the trust to actually do their jobs. Teamwork encourages cooperation over strict, rigid hierarchies. The core hypothesis was that giving people authority and encouraging cooperation directly predicts how well a company adapts. But, and this is a big but, only if it is managed by that final variable, humble leadership. Let's dig into part 5, the results on humble leadership.
So let's look at the actual numbers. The data revealed one seriously crucial metric, 9.446. That is the T statistic measuring the path from empowerment directly to organizational change. Now, to put that into perspective, in structural equation modeling, anything over 1.964 is considered statistically significant. So hitting a score of 9.446, that is a massive validation. It mathematically proves that empowering employees isn't just some fluffy HR initiative. It is a profound, direct driver of effective organizational change.
But here is the absolute secret sauce the data revealed. Humble leadership mediates this entire relationship. Think about it. You can have all the participation, empowerment, and teamwork in the world, but if you have traditional, rigid, top-down leadership in place, it will still bottleneck the whole process. Humble leadership acts as the essential glue here. By fostering an atmosphere of trust, psychological safety, and genuine openness, humble leaders drastically reduce employee resistance, which is what actually allows those empowered teams to execute the change.
And this quote brilliantly illustrates what humble leadership actually looks like in practice, straight from the study's own measurement scale. It means the leader actively seeks feedback, even if it is highly critical of them. They have the self-awareness to acknowledge when other people in the room possess more knowledge or better skills than they do. They're genuinely open to others' ideas and advice. In a wildly competitive telecommunications or refinery environment, showing this kind of humility isn't a weakness at all. It is literally the ultimate tool for agile adaptation.
Finally, Part 6, Conclusions and Future Research. Based on all their findings, the authors drew up this fantastic strategic roadmap. For decades, the standard corporate model for change was this terrifying ultimatum, change or die. But the data clearly shows that creating that kind of urgency just spikes anxiety and resistance. Instead, this new roadmap frames change as a continuous, collaborative learning process. You start by identifying internal and external sources of change, you build a collaborative task force, run real impact studies, and crucially, you assess and train your employees based on what they actually need. It literally replaces fear with structural empowerment. Now, to be totally fair, no study is absolutely perfect, and the researchers are very transparent about their limitations. The sample size of 412 was relatively modest, plus, because the surveys had to be translated from English into French for the workers in Côte d'Ivoire, there's a slight potential for minor translation bias. Because of that, they recommend that future research tests these exact same models over in public organizations, pinpoints exactly how specific corporate cultures might affect the data, and expands into other industries just to make sure these findings remain globally consistent. So we've seen the hard data, we've walked through the collaborative roadmap, and we now know for a fact that 70% of change fails when the human element is ignored. So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. Think about your own workplace right now. Does your organization's leadership style actively invite change through humility and true empowerment? Or does it unintentionally resist it by clinging to outdated, rigid hierarchies? The very survival of your business might just depend on that answer. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, and I'll see you next time.